FlatsClass YouTube fans, welcome back to the channel. I got a question the other day on one of our other videos, and it was from a gentleman that was asking, when is bait casting gear applicable in inshore fishing? And the reason he's asking that is because he sees that I prefer bait casting equipment over spinning equipment for most of my inshore fishing. And that is the absolute truth. So I said, you know what? I answered that question, and I said, I'm going to make a video about this because it begs to compare why you would use spinning gear versus bait casting gear or vice versa. So I thought today's an excellent day to sit down and talk about that. So I'm going to jump in here in the professional. We'll talk a little bit about what I think the strengths and weaknesses of both are. Let's go. Okay, spinning gear. Let's talk about that first. Try to make a comparison between that and the casting rod. I prefer the casting rod, but I want to tell you why most of us use spinning gear. Number one reason, ease of use. You open the bail, you make a cast, you close the bail, you reel it back. Not a lot of bad stuff happens. You don't have backlashes. You don't have a lot of things going wrong when you're doing this. Now, there's the occasional wind knot. That is a possibility. But if you're buying good, high-quality equipment, remember, I'm a Shimano guy, you're not going to have those problems. And the oscillation is set so now that those wind knots on these trouble-free spools, it just doesn't happen anymore, especially with these sophisticated rod setups they have now. So that just doesn't happen anymore. The other reason spinning gear is so popular is the fact that you can throw live bait, natural bait presentations on it. Now, I'm an artificial lure professional fishing guide, so my clients are throwing lures. So this generally comes down to a finesse technique. So anytime we're throwing lures that are, under a half an ounce, and for me it would be under a quarter of an ounce, I'm throwing 2,500 size reels, 3,000 size spinning reels, and 4,000. So it's anywhere from 5-pound braid, maybe up to 15-pound braid, but 8-pound braid being the most often. That's going to allow me to have these thin lines. I can tie long leaders with tiny knots that go through the guides. And when you're fishing clear waters like I do here on the Nature Coast, this is a big time advantage. And I enjoy it. But when you have 7.5 foot links and you're throwing it and you got light braid that floats on the water and there's wind and there's current, sometimes your lure is not going through the zone you want it to. That's why I feel as if the casting rod gives you so many more possibilities on lure choices and just techniques and scenario fishing that you never would have with this. So let's talk about this next. All right, let's talk about the casting gear. I prefer casting gear. Reason why? Gives me the widest range of lures I can use. So for me in particular, who grew up throwing this stuff, I can use lures as light as 1/8, 3/16. 3/16 probably a better choice, all the way up to as heavy as they get. I throw a lot of big swim baits, a lot of glide baits on stuff like this, bigger top waters, and I feel like I have much more control. I can have heavier line with shorter rod lengths so that I have a lot of accuracy, and I have a wider line of line choices. I can use 20-pound braid. I can use up to 65-pound braid if I'd like to, with some bigger reels like 200s and 300 sizes. Most of the time I'm using 150. I can also use fluorocarbon. I use a ton of fluorocarbon, believe it or not. Half the reels in my boat have either 14 or 16-pound fluorocarbon tied on it, and I just put a little bit of bite tippet on it. That's how I finesse fish with them if I want to sight fish, because I'm wanting to use a line that doesn't make any noise. The same reason I use the lighter line on spinning gear, so that I'm less noticeable in the water column, especially living here on the Nature Coast. And fishing these clear waters, you have to have that type of of quiet line to be able to fool these fish with lures. I can also use heavier jigs, plugs that have big trebles, because now I've got much more power, and it just gives me so much more control over what I can do. And it's hard to explain that to someone with spinning gear because they've been using it all their life. They're like, I can do everything you can do. I go, no, 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 you can't. Are there there are drawbacks to this. I mean, it's hard to throw something super light. Are you going to have a backlash? You damn sure are going to have a backlash, especially when you're learning. But reels like this one here, the Corrado DC, that's a good reel to start out on. This is a 200 size. I like it. It's got a wider spool, fits good in my hand. I can drive cast with this. Once you become adept at using this gear, I promise you, you will use a lot less of this gear. Is one better than the other? Really depends on your style of fishing, how you fish, natural bait angler or whatnot. But for me, even the lure speed, that you have control, because what you don't understand is a lot of spinning rods, especially when you get in 3,000 and 4,000 size reels that people prefer, when you turn one turn on the handle, you could be moving that bait 34, 35 inches all the way up to 40 something inches on one turn. When you pick lower gear ratios, let's just say like 6.2, maybe even in the 5s to 1s, 5.2 to 1 or something like that, you might move as little as 19 to 22 inches of line. And if you want a faster reel, let's just say the average now is about 7.2, then you're only really moving about 30 inches of line or 31 inches of line. And if you want a really fast reel like an 8.5 that we have in the Trank series and a few others, you can move it maybe 35 or 36 if you have a more of a speed presentation. But I had the ability to have that kind of lure speed and control so that I can move the bait slowly through the zone, where I can't do that with this. I have to use a lot more rod and be careful how I manipulate. So this is kind of limiting here, and this gives me way more options. So when you really weigh the two, and if you like it, and if you start learning it, you're gonna find out that casting gear really is the better way to go, in my opinion. Just takes a little bit more time to learn because it's a little more complex. You got to set braking up. We'll do a video on that. But if you take the time to learn, you're going to realize that you have a distinct advantage with casting gear over spinning. But you need to have both. For sure, you need to have both. If I'm going to make a couple of recommendations, because I always get this on these spinning reels. So what Shimano, and I am a paid pro from Shimano, what Shimano reel would you recommend? I typically say the Stratic is a good one to start with. It's a solid state reel that does everything pretty well. If you're looking for something a little bit lighter and a little bit more finessier for those Ned rig presentations, definitely pick a Vanford. Vanford is unbelievable. And if you want to spend the extra money and you want something that has a lot of the features like the Twin Power might have and the Vanford would have, then there's no doubt you should pick a Sustain. The Shimano Sustain is amazing. When it comes to casting gear, I love this. If you're first learning, you got to throw something like the Corrado DC because it is so forgiving, and the sophistication of the braking in here is such now that you don't have to think anymore. There's a chip in here. It does all the thinking for you. It will minimize backlashes, huge. But if you're going to fish saltwater a lot and you're going to be in small skiffs, wade fishing, whatnot, try this Tranks. This is the Tranks 150. Oh, let me turn the box around for you. It's the Tranks 150. Highly recommend. I've had a lot of success with this, and it's holding up in the salt. If you like what you're learning here on FlatsClass YouTube, really like it, and it's helping you, push that button. I want you as a sub. I want you in my virtual classroom every week. It's my job to make you a better angler. All right, until next week, Captain CA signing off.